Hello, everyone, and going to bring you another fairy tale by the great Hans Christian Andersen today. And this one is known as either Little Tiny or Thumbelina. I kind of knew it more commonly as Thumbelina, but it's also known as Little Tiny. So here we go. Little Tiny or Thumbelina. There was once a woman who wished very much to have a little child, but she could not obtain her wish. At last she went to a fairy, and she said, I should so much very like to have a child. Can you tell me where I can find one? Oh, that can easily be managed, said the fairy. Here is a barley corn of a different kind to which would grow in a farmer's field, and the kind which the chickens eat. Put this one into a flower pot and see what will happen. Thank you, said the woman, and she gave the fairy 12 shillings, which was the price of the barley corn. When she went home and planted it, and it immediately grew up into a large, handsome flower, something like a tulip in appearance, but with its leaves tightly closed as if it were still a bud. Oh, it is a beautiful flower, said the woman, and she kissed the red and golden colored leaves. And while she did so, the flower opened, and she could see that it was a real tulip. Within the flower, upon the green velvet stamens, sat a very delicate and graceful little maiden. She was scarcely half as long as a thumb, and they gave her the name of Thumbelina, or Tiny, because she was so small. A walnut shell, elegantly polished, served her for a cradle. Her bed was formed of blue violet leaves with a rose leaf for the counterpane. Here she slept at night, but during the day she amused herself on a table where the woman had placed a plateful of water. Round this plate were wreaths of flowers with their stems in the water, and upon it floated a large tulip leaf, which served Tiny for a boat. Here the little maiden sat and rowed herself from side to side with two oars made of white horsehair. Um, it was really a very pretty sight. Tiny could also sing so softly and sweetly that nothing like her singing had ever been heard before. One night, while she lay in her pretty bed, a large, ugly, wet toad crept through a broken pane of glass in the window and leaped right upon the table where Tiny lay sleeping under her rose leaf quilt. Ah, what a pretty little wife this would make for my son, said the toad. And she took up the walnut shell in which little Tiny lay asleep and jumped through the window with it into the garden. In the swampy margin of the broad stream in the garden lived the toad with her son. He was even uglier than his mother, and when he saw the pretty little maiden in her elegant bed, he could only cry out, Croak, croak, croak. Don't speak so loud or she will wake up, said the toad, and then she might run away, for she is as light as swan's down. We will place her on one of the water daylilies out in the stream. It will be like an island to her. She is so light and small, and when she cannot escape, and then she cannot escape. And while she is away, we will make haste and prepare the stateroom under the marsh in which you are to live when you are married. Far out in the stream grew a number of water lilies with broad green leaves, which seemed to float on top of the water. The largest of these leaves appeared farther off than the rest, and the old toad swam out to it with the walnut shell in which little Tiny lay still asleep. The tiny creature woke very early in the morning and began to cry bitterly when she found out where she was, for she could see nothing but water on every side of the large green leaf and no way of reaching the land. Meanwhile, the old toad was very busy under the marsh, decking her rooms with rushes and wild yellow flowers to make it look pretty for her new daughter-in-law. And then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf on which she had placed poor little Tiny. She wanted to fetch the pretty bed that she might put in the bridal chambers for it to be ready for her. The old toad bowed low to her in the water and said, Well, here is my son, and he will be your husband, and you will live happily in the marsh by the stream. Croak, croak, croak was all her son could say for himself, so that The toad took up the elegant little bed and swam away with it, leaving Tiny all alone on the green leaf, where she sat and she wept. She could not bear to think of living with that old toad and having her ugly son for her husband. The little fishes who swam about in the water beneath had seen the toad, and they heard what she said, so they lifted their heads above the water to look at the little maiden. As soon as they caught sight of her, they saw how very pretty she was, and it made them very sorry to think that she must go and live with those ugly toads. No, it must never be, they said. So they assembled together in the water around the green stalk, which held the leaf on which the little maiden stood, and they gnawed away at it with their teeth. Then then the leaf floated down the stream, carrying Tiny far away out of reach of land. Tiny sailed past many towns, and the little birds in the bushes saw her, and they sang, "Oh, what a lovely little creature!" So the leaf swam away with her farther and farther until it brought her to other lands. A graceful little white butterfly constantly fluttered around her, and at last it alighted on the leaf. Tiny pleased him, and she was glad of it, for now the toad could not possibly reach her, and the country through which she sailed was so beautiful, and the sun shone upon the water till it glittered like liquid gold. She took off her girdle and tied one end of it around the butterfly, and the other end of the ribbon she fastened to the leaf, which now glided on much faster than ever, taking little Tiny with it as she stood. Presently, a large cockchafer flew by. The moment he caught sight of her, cockchafer is a beetle. Um, he seized her round her delicate waist with his claws and flew with her into a tree. The green leaf floated away on the brook, and the butterfly flew with it, for he was fastened to it and could not get away. Oh, how frightened little Tiny felt when the cockchafer flew with her to the tree. But especially was she sorry for the beautiful white butterfly which she had fastened to the leaf, for if he could not free himself, he would die of hunger. But the cockchafer did not trouble himself at all about the matter, and he seated himself by her side on a large green leaf and gave her some honey from the flowers to eat, and told her that she was so very pretty, though not in the least like a cockchafer. After a time, all the cockchafers turned up their feelers, and they said, "Why, she has only two legs. How ugly that looks!" "She has no feelers," said another. "Her waist is so slim. Pooh! Why, she is like a human being." "Oh, she is so ugly," said all the lady cockchafers, although Tiny was very pretty. Then the cockchafer who had run away with her believed all the others when they said she was ugly, and so he would have nothing more to say to her. And he told her she might go down wherever she liked. Then he flew down with her from the tree, and he placed her on a daisy, and she wept at the thought that she was so ugly that even the cockchafers would have nothing to say to her. And all the while she was really the loveliest creature that one could ever imagine, and as tender and as delicate as a beautiful rose leaf. During the whole summer, poor little Tiny lived quite alone in the wide forest. She wove herself a bed with blades of grass and hung it up under a broad leaf to protect herself from rains. And she sucked the honey from the flowers for food, and she drank the dew from their leaves every morning. And so passed away the summer and the autumn. And then came the winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung to her so sweetly had flown away, and the trees and the flowers became withered. The large clover leaf under the shelter of which she lived was now rolled together and shriveled up. Nothing remained but a yellow, withered stalk. She felt dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she herself was so frail and delicate that poor little Tiny was nearly frozen to death. It began to snow too, and the snowflakes, as they fell upon her, were like a whole shovelful falling down upon one of us, for we are all tall, but she was only an inch high. Then she wrapped herself up in a dry leaf, but it cracked in the middle, and it could not keep her warm, and she shivered with cold. Near the wood in which she lived lay a cornfield, but the corn had been cut a long time ago. Nothing remained but the bare, dry stubble standing up out of frozen ground. It was to her like struggling through a large wood. Oh, how she shivered with the cold. She came at last to the door of a field mouse who had left a little den under the corn stubble. There dwelt the field mouse in warmth and comfort, with a whole room full of corn, a kitchen, and a beautiful dining room. Poor little Tiny stood before the door, just like a little bigger girl, and begged for a small piece of barley corn, for she had been without a morsel to eat for 2 whole days. Oh, you poor creature, said the field mouse, who was really a good old field mouse. Come into my warm room and dine with me. She was very pleased with Tiny, so she said, you are quite welcome to stay with me all winter if you like. But you must keep my rooms clean and neat and tell me stories, for I shall like to hear them very much. And Tiny did all the field mouse asked of her and found herself very comfortable. We shall have a visitor soon, said the field mouse one day. My neighbor pays me a visit once a week, and he is better off than I am. He has large rooms, uh, and wears a beautiful black velvet coat. If you could only have been if you could only have him for a husband, you would be well provided for. Indeed, for he is blind, so you must tell him some of your prettiest stories. But Tiny did not feel at all interested about this new neighbor, for he was a mole. However, he came, and he paid a visit dressed in his black velvet coat. He is very rich and learned, and his house is 20 times larger than mine is, said the field mouse. He was rich and learned, no doubt, but he always spoke slightingly of things like the sun and the pretty flowers, because he had never even seen them. Tiny was obliged to sing to him, Lady Bird, fly away home, and many other pretty songs, and the mole fell in love with her because she had such a sweet voice, but he said nothing yet, for he was very cautious. A short time before the mole had a short time before, the mole had dug a long passage under the earth, which led from the dwelling of the field mouse to his own, and here she had permission to walk with Tiny whenever she liked. But he warned them not to be alarmed, because there was the sight of a dead bird that lay in the passage. It was a perfect bird with a beak and feathers, and could not have been dead very long. And he was just lying just where the mole had made his passage. The mole took a piece of phosphorescent wood in his mouth, and it glittered like fire in the dark. And then he went before them to light them through the long dark passage. When they came to the spot where lay the dead bird, the mole pushed his broad nose through the ceiling, and the earth gave way so that there was a large hole, and daylight shone into the passage. In the middle of the floor lay a dead swallow, his beautiful wings pulled close to his sides, his feet and his head drawn up under his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of the cold. It made little Tiny very sad to see it. She did so love the little birds all the summer that had sung and twittered for her so beautifully. But the mole pushed it aside with his crooked legs, and he said, he will sing no more now. How miserable it must have been to have been born a little bird. I'm sure thankful that none of my children will ever be birds, for they can do nothing but cry, tweet, tweet, and they will always die of hunger in the winter. Yes, you may well say that, as a clever man, exclaimed the field mouse. What is the use of his twittering when the winter comes and he must either starve or be frozen to death? Still, birds are very high bred. Tiny said nothing, but when the two others had turned their backs on the bird, she stooped down and stroked the soft feathers which covered the head, and she kissed the closed eyelids. Perhaps this was the one who sang to me so sweetly this summer, she said, and how much pleasure it gave me, you dear pretty bird. The mole now stopped up the hole through which the daylight shone, and then accompanied the lady home. But during the night, Tiny could not even sleep. She got up out of bed and wove a large, beautiful carpet of hay. Then she carried it to the dead bird, and she spread it over him with some down from the feather from the with some down from the flowers which she had found in the field mouse's room. It was as soft as wool, and she spread some of it on each side of the bird so that he might lie warmly in the cold earth. Farewell, you pretty little bird," said she. "Farewell, and thank you for your delightful singing during the summer when all the leaves were green and the trees were green and the warm sun shone upon us." Then she laid her head on the bird's breast, but she was alarmed immediately, for it seemed as if something inside the bird went thump, thump. It was the bird's heart, because he was not really dead and only benumbed with the cold, and the warmth she had given him had restored him to life. In autumn, all the swallows fly away into the warmer countries, but if one happens to linger too long, the cold seizes it and it becomes frozen, and it falls down as if dead. It remains where it falls, and the cold snow covers it. Tiny trembled very much. She was quite frightened, for the bird was large, a great deal larger than herself, and she was only an inch high. But she took courage, laid the wool more thickly over the poor swallow, and then took a leaf with which she had used for her own counterpane and laid it over the head of the poor bird. The next morning she again stole out to see him. He was alive, but very weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment to look at Tiny, who stood by holding a piece of decayed wood in her hand, for she had no other lantern. "Thank you, you pretty little maiden," said the sick swallow. "I have been so nicely warmed, and that I shall soon regain my strength, and I shall be able to fly again into the warm sunshine." "Oh," said she, "but it is cold outdoors now. It snows and it freezes. Stay in your warm bed, and I will take care of you." Then she brought the swallow some water and a flower leaf, and after he had drunk, he told her that he had wounded one of his wings in a thorn bush and could not fly as fast as the others, and were soon far away from him on their journey to warm countries. Then at last he had fallen to earth and could remember no more, nor how he came to be here, where she had found him. The whole winter the swallow remained underground, and Tiny nursed him with care and with love. Neither the mole nor the field mouse knew anything about it, for they did not like the swallow. Very soon the springtime came, and the sun warmed the earth, and then the swallow bade her farewell, and she opened the hole in the ceiling which the mole had made. The sun shone in upon them so beautifully that the swallow asked her, "Won't you come with me? You could sit on my back," he said, and he could, "I will fly you away into the green woods." But Tiny knew it would make the field mouse very grieved if she left her in that manner. So she said, "No, I cannot do it yet." "Farewell, then. Farewell, you pretty good little maiden," said the swallow, and he flew out into the sunshine. Tiny looked after him, and the tears rose in her eyes. She was very fond of the poor swallow. "Tweet, tweet," sang out the bird as he flew away into the green woods, and Tiny felt very sad. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The corn which had been sown in the field over the house of the field mouse had grown up high into the air and formed a thick wood to Tiny, who was only an inch in height. "You are going to be married, Tiny," said the field mouse one day. "My neighbor has asked for you. What good fortune for a poor child like you. Now we will prepare your wedding clothes. They must both be woolen and linen. Nothing must be wanting when you were the mole's wife." Tiny had to sit and turn the spindle, and the field mouse hired 4 spiders who were to weave day and night. Every evening the mole visited her and was continually speaking of the time when the summer would be over, and then he would keep his wedding day with Tiny. But now the heat of the sun was so great that it burned the earth and made it quite hard, like stone. And soon as the summer was over, the wedding would take place. But Tiny was not at all pleased, for she did not like this tiresome mole. Every morning when the sun rose and every evening when it went down, she would creep out at the door, and as the wind blew aside the ears of corn so that she could see the blue sky, she thought how beautiful and bright it seemed out there, and wished so much to see her dear swallow again. But he never returned, for by this time he had flown far away into the lovely green forest. When autumn arrived, Tiny had her outfit quite ready and the field mouse said to her, "In 4 weeks, the wedding must take place." Then Tiny wept and said she would just not marry that disagreeable mole. "Nonsense," replied the field mouse. "Now don't you be obstinate, or I shall bite you with my white teeth. He is a very handsome mole. The queen herself does not wear more beautiful velvets and furs. His kitchen and cellars are quite full. You ought to be very thankful for such good fortune." So the wedding day was fixed, on which the mole was to fetch Tiny away to live with him deep under the earth, and never again to see the warm sun, because he did not like it. The poor child was so very unhappy at the thought of saying farewell to the beautiful sun. And as the field mouse had given her permission to stand at the door, she went to look out once more. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her arms towards it. And then she walked a short distance from the house, for the corn had been cut and only the dry stubble remained in the fields. "Farewell, farewell," she repeated, twining her arm around a little red flower that grew just by her side. "Greet the little swallow for me, if you should see him again." Tweet, tweet sounded suddenly over her head. She looked up, and there the swallow himself was flying close by. As soon as he spied Tiny, he was delighted, and then she told him how unwilling she felt to marry that ugly mole, and to live always beneath the earth in the darkness, and to never see the bright sun any more. And as she told him, she wept. "Cold winter's coming," said the swallow, "and I am going to fly away into the warmer country. Will you come with me? You can sit on my back and fasten yourself with your sash, and then we can fly away from that ugly mole and his gloomy rooms, far away over the mountains and into warmer countries, where the sun shines more brightly than here, where it is always summer and the flowers bloom in great beauty. Fly now with me, my dear little Tiny. You saved my life when I was frozen in that dark passage. Come with me." "Yes, yes, I will go with you," said Tiny, and she seated herself on the bird's back with her feet on his outstretched wings, and she tied her girdle to one of his strongest feathers. Then the swallow rose high in the air, and he flew over the forest, over the sea, high above the highest mountains, covered with eternal snow. Tiny would have been frozen in the cold air, but she crept under the bird's warm feathers, keeping her little head uncovered so that she might admire the beautiful lands over which they passed. At length, they reached the warm countries where the sun shines brightly and the sky seems so much higher above the earth. Here on the hedges and by the wayside grew purple, green, and white grapes. Lemons and oranges hung from trees in the woods, and the air was fragrant with myrtles and orange blossoms. Beautiful children ran along the country lanes, playing with large gay butterflies, and as the swallow flew farther and farther, every place appeared still more lovely. At last they came to a blue lake, and by the side of it, shaded by trees of the deepest green, stood a palace of dazzling white marble, built in the olden times. Vines clustered round its lofty pillars, and at the top were many swallows' nests, and one of these was the home of the swallow who carried Tiny. "This is my house," said the swallow, "but it would not do for you to live there. You would not be comfortable. You must choose for yourself one of those lovely flowers, and I will put you down upon it, and then you shall have everything that you can wish to make you happy." "That will be delightful," she said, and she clapped her little hands for joy. A large marble pillar lay on the ground, which, in falling, had broken into 3 pieces. Between these pieces grew the most beautiful large white flowers. So the swallow flew down with Tiny and placed her in one of the broad leaves. But how surprised she was to see in the middle of the flower a tiny little man, as white and transparent as if he had been made of crystal. He had a gold crown on his head and delicate wings at his side, and he was not much larger than Tiny herself. He was the angel of the flower, for a tiny man and a tiny woman dwelt in every flower, and this was the king of them all. "Oh, how beautiful he is," whispered Tiny to the swallow. The little prince was at first quite frightened at the bird, who was like a giant compared to such a delicate little creature as himself. But when he saw Tiny, he was delighted, and he thought of her as the prettiest little maiden he had ever seen. He took the gold crown from his head, and he placed it on hers, and he asked her name, and if she would be his wife and queen over all the flowers. This certainly was a very different sort of husband to the son of a toad or the mole, uh, with his black velvet fur. So she said yes to the handsome prince. Then all the flowers opened, and out of each came a little lady or a tiny lord, and all so pretty. It was quite a pleasure to look at them. Each of them brought Tiny a present, but the best gift was a pair of beautiful wings, which belonged to a white firefly, and they fastened them to Tiny's shoulders so that she might fly from flower to flower. Then there was much rejoicing, and the little swallow who sat above them in his nest was asked to sing a wedding song, which he did as well as he could. But in his heart, he felt sad, for he was very fond of Tiny and would have liked never to part from her again. You must not be called Tiny any more, said the spirit of the flowers to her. It's an ugly name when you are so very pretty. We will call you Maya. Farewell, farewell, said the swallow with a heavy heart as he left the warm countries to fly back into Denmark. There he had a nest over the window of a house in which dwelt the writer of fairy tales. The swallow sang, tweet, tweet, and from his song came the whole story. And that is Thumbelina, or uh, Little Tiny. So I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's a really pretty story, and like I said, I definitely hope you all enjoyed hearing it, and please, if you would, check out all of our other stories and fairy tales, and check out our channel, leave a like, subscribe, and come back and visit us again. Thank you very much from Dom and Mike's Spoiler Alert.